Hey, LinkedIn, and welcome back to Business Unusual. This is a live show brought to you by the LinkedIn News team, where we're talking as a community about the changing nature of work. I'm your host, Caroline Fairchild, coming to you from my home office here in New York City. It's Thursday, August 27th, and here's a quick look at the top stories that are trending right now on LinkedIn. Salesforce is cutting jobs, even as its stock soars. The tech giant announced layoffs amounting to about 2% of its workforce, or 1,000 jobs. In March, CEO Mark Benioff tweeted he would avoid layoffs for the first 90 days of the pandemic. And new data is giving us a fresh look at how working parents are faring during this time. In a recent survey by Northeastern University, 13% of working parents said that they had to cut back their hours or quit their job entirely to make up for childcare needs. Working parents account for a third of the nation's workforce, and on average have lost about 8 hours a week of productivity due to the pandemic. For more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed, or if you're on mobile, click into the search box. That brings us to the main story that we have for you today. As remote work continues into the foreseeable future, online communication is skyrocketing. But how secure are all these apps that we're using to talk to our colleagues? How secure are they for real? On today's show, we're going to speak with a leader who has spent time thinking about that. But first, we're going to look at a survey of IT leaders that shows us how employers are really responding to the COVID-19 crisis. 44% said that they didn't provide work from home cybersecurity training. 45% did not analyze the security of privacy features in the software tools considered necessary for remote work. And 68% did not deploy a new antivirus solution for work-issued devices. Joining us on today's show to discuss some of the concerns about this is Brian Acton. He is the co-founder of WhatsApp, a chat service he sold to Facebook in 2014, and he's now focused on the Signal Foundation. It's a messaging app geared at making private communication accessible and ubiquitous. Signal has tens of millions of users and has started beta testing a video call feature as well. Acton will break down how cybersecurity concerns have changed amid this crisis, and also why he chose to keep the Signal Foundation a nonprofit venture. But before we bring Brian into the stream, we want to hear from you through the poll that we have for you today. We've been asking members on LinkedIn, has working remotely made you worried about your online privacy? A, yes, you're more concerned now than you were before the pandemic. B, no, you're not worried about it. Or C, it really depends. Let us know your vote in the stream right now, but also tell us your thoughts behind the vote, and let's have a conversation about that on today's show. And if you have any questions for Brian, please let us know as well. And with that, I want to bring on Brian Acton to the stream. Hi, Brian.
Hi. Good
morning.
Thanks
so much for joining us. All right, so for those in the stream who may not be familiar with Signal, talk to us a little bit about how it's structured differently to be more secure.
Signal, from its very inception is security by design. We take a stance of building the product in such a fashion that all of your communications are encrypted by default. This means that you don't have to deliberately say, I want a private chat or I want a separate session or anything like that. It's always on all the time. We even take it a step further and we look at not only your communications, but all the information around your communications. People call this the metadata. And we also make sure that the metadata is also encrypted so that no one, including ourselves, is able to see who you're talking to, how often you're talking to them, what groups you're in, et cetera. So security by design.
And prior to founding Signal, you founded WhatsApp. What about that platform and its integration into Facebook made you more concerned about privacy?
It's Facebook just has a different position relative to their business model. Facebook needs more information about your activity, what you choose to do, who you talk to, et cetera, so that they can better select and position ads in front of you. For our product, we don't have any ad support. It's a nonprofit. And so we are in a better position that we don't have to collect information about your activity. And we don't want to collect information about your activity.
And when we think about the information that technology companies are collecting, how much of it is actually useful for them versus information that they may just be collecting because some auxiliary parts of it are useful, but not the whole part of it?
You would be surprised. When you first start collecting information, you ask yourself that question. It's like, how useful is this? Why would I bother? And then what ends up happening is you have very smart scientists who build fancy probability models, and they start to really make some interesting sort of determinations that like, oh, if you do this, if you have these sets of behaviors, chances are you might be male, you might be over 25, et cetera. And then we can start to target ads to you being a male over 25. So, more and more, it's important for you to be aware of what activity you are doing on an online site and make sure that you understand what the privacy policies are for your online usage, and make sure that you give permission. It's all about permission in these systems.
Now I know why that dog leash I was talking to someone in the dog park earlier today about showed up in my Instagram feed later today. For those of you who are just joining the stream, this is Business Unusual, a live show where we're talking about the changing nature of work. I'm here with Brian Acton. He's the co-founder of WhatsApp, as well as the founder of the Signal Foundation. We're talking all things privacy at work, and we want to hear from you. What are your privacy concerns as we talk about this pandemic and have more communication just like Brian and I are talking right now online? Let us know your questions and concerns in the stream. We'll have a conversation about that on today's show. I want to say hi to some members in the stream: Rita from Austin, Mary from Colorado, Greg from New York City, where I am as well, Frank from Washington, D.C., Mario from Argentina. Brian knows a little bit of Spanish. He was sharing that with us at the top of the show, and Anand from India. Thank you so much for joining us. Brian, let's talk a little bit about this pandemic and how remote work has changed how people are thinking about online privacy. What are you seeing and hearing, and how has it changed how people are using Signal as well?
It's a brave new world for many workers, especially knowledge workers, technology workers, being sent home, not being able to come into the office. And fundamentally, we're seeing a shift in collaboration and using online tools for collaboration, whether it's document sharing, whether it's video chat. There's a plethora of tools available. But we're also starting to realize the shortcomings of those tools, the privacy shortcomings. Zoom, I think, got thrown under the bus, for its privacy position at the beginning. And then they had to very quickly, sort of remediate the product, add more encryption. They went and they bought Keybase. So you're seeing companies reacting very much so to the need for privacy in pretty much all of your activities. Because companies really need their intellectual property to be protected. And when people are in satellite positions at their homes, it's a lot harder for them to control the environment. And that's where they have to rely on encryption tools and encrypted products to help them protect their intellectual property and their workforce.
And when those accidents happen, those incidents with Zoom, and they take over the headlines, and a lot of people are talking about the insecurity of platforms like that, we see a lot of members on LinkedIn concerned about their cybersecurity. If you're not in the tech world, if you don't understand a lot about technology, how can you get a better understanding for how secure these platforms really are?
That's a great question. The best strategy is to sort of phone a friend. You really want to find, an IT professional, someone that you're connected to that can give you a good recommendation as to what is a strong privacy preserving product. And generally, they're the ones that are well connected into, this is good, this is bad. They're the ones following the headlines. They're following the stream of information that's flowing. And they can usually, this is for like a general layperson, for my mom, for example, everyone's mom calls their, child to get these types of recommendations. And then similarly in the workforce, you should ask your IT and security people at your work and your job. Lots of companies do really well in protecting security. Signal, of course, is all about building a strongly privacy protecting product. And there are others out there as well.
What does that look like on the ground in terms of how Signal is really keeping privacy in mind, and the way that it operates and the way that it builds new features? I know that you guys are beta testing a video chat feature. What does that look like differently than, say, a company who may not be thinking of privacy as their top concern?
The real thing on the ground is that we start from a position of privacy. And so we're always thinking about sort of how we can make sure that the information is not stored in our servers or encrypted on our servers. We're thinking about how we can avoid collecting information and not observing activity. So we actually, we really do start from a very vastly different position than say your standard run-of-the-mill tech company. I think your standard run-of-the-mill tech company, it's more like, well, how can I build this feature fast? And sometimes building something fast means you cut corners, and one of those corners that you might cut is privacy. We make sure that we do not cut corners. We make sure that we build a strongly solid and validated, secure, and private product, and we don't cut corners on that.
Hmm. You talk about collecting information. A big topic on LinkedIn as this pandemic continues is workplace surveillance, apps that companies are putting in to measure productivity as we're all working from home. And they say that this is good for workers and good for the bottom line, but what's your take on some of these apps that are measuring activity, measuring how workers are doing as we all continue to work from home?
You know, in my field, there's a longstanding sort of metric, which is like number of lines of code written. And my experience is that these types of metrics, they may be useful as sort of litmus test type metrics, but they're not very good for making strong decisions. In my line of field, for example, sometimes it's about removing code instead of adding code, and there's no metric for that. So, you know, when you think about sort of like time spent in front of a computer or any other type of metric like that, I think that you have to take it with a grain of salt. And you have to factor in a lot of the other subjective factors in hiring and firing, measuring productivity, and everything else. Management science has been trying to do this for a very long time, and in my opinion, quite unsuccessfully.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and bring in some member comments from the stream. Cheryl says, I'm getting text messages, emails, and phone calls that are scammers. I've been hurt several times. How can we even know what is real anymore? Cheryl, sorry about that experience. Andrew says, do you see people in your industry moving toward more privacy features and development, or are they moving away from it? That's a question for you, Brian.
Absolutely, people are moving towards more privacy features. They're learning to ask for privacy protection. Are my conversations encrypted? Do I own my photos? You know, are these photos going to get redistributed? So there's all these types of questions that people are bubbling up, and then they're coming out in the press, and then people are reading the stories, or they're watching them on streams, and it's creating the dialogue between the companies and the users and the customers. And that's the dialogue you want to have. You want people to ask about privacy. Is this privacy protected? You know, in some parts of the world, there's even more laws that protect privacy. In Europe, there's the General Data Protection Regulation, for example, the GDPR. The United States doesn't have such a law, but the people of Europe asked for it. They wanted it. So yeah, I think it's going to continue, and it's going to elevate over time.
Do you think people, since this pandemic began, are more concerned? I'm going to bring up the poll that we have for the viewers in the stream right now. We want to know if you are more concerned or less concerned about your online privacy as remote work becomes something that a lot of us are going to be doing for the foreseeable future. Vote in the stream right now. And also I'm going to get Brian's take on the poll. Do you think people are more concerned? What are you hearing?
Absolutely more concerned. I think that we've seen a number of events in the last calendar year where people have elevated their sort of concerns relative to their privacy, whether it was in activism and protest, whether it was related to COVID, whether it was something else. But and it's not exclusively limited to the United States. You know, there have been events in Hong Kong and other parts of the world where people are extraordinarily concerned about their privacy and protecting, you know, the information about who they talk to and what they're saying.
See a comment in the stream here from Lisa, who's in Orlando, saying, privacy policies are so long and complicated. I'm sure most people are just inclined to give up privacy to get use of an app. What would you say to Lisa? Are there parts of a privacy policy that you should read? Why should you read them in the first place?
You know, that is quite the challenge. The running joke that I remember was the old iTunes terms of service was like 34 pages. And this was back in 2010 or so. Reading a 34-page privacy and terms of service agreement is not something that I would expect the average layperson to do. There are now websites that help summarize some of this information. I encourage people to seek that out so that they can be better informed about, again, what they're agreeing to. in the United States, the FTC has this idea of what's called notice and consent. So every time someone updates their privacy policy on a website that you might use, you might want to check some of these watchdog websites to make sure that the changes that are being put in are reasonable to your expectations, especially around privacy. It's unfortunate. I wish it was simpler. The Signal privacy policy is pretty short, which I'm grateful for, and we try very hard to keep it short. I think there are some other companies out there that also have a similar mantra. DuckDuckGo, for example, also is a strong privacy preserving search engine, and I think you can read. What you'll find typically is that the privacy preserving companies tend to have the shorter terms of service and privacy policies to begin with, because they just don't want to collect your information and don't want to have to explain why they're collecting your information.
And speaking of Signal, you have tens of millions of users, but I think a lot of members in this stream may be surprised to know that you operate the foundation as a nonprofit. Profits are not something that you're interested in accruing right now. Why did you choose to do that model?
I chose it for a number of reasons. First of all, it was a great blend with the pre-existing organization, the Open Whisper Systems organization that eventually became the Signal Foundation. Whisper Systems was founded with the ideals of nonprofit, but never sort of took it to the step of getting a 501c3 certification. And so doing a nonprofit, I think, lets us maintain our mission and our ideals much better than a for-profit organization. I think in a for-profit organization, there's too much temptation and too much drive to, sort of manage that slippery slope of decisions. What if we collect this information just for this purpose? And then, 12 months later, that information is propagated in ways that you cannot understand. As a nonprofit, we don't have those motivations. We have a motivation to service the user. We have a motivation to provide excellence in privacy and provide excellence in the products and services that we offer. So that resonates with me. It resonates very strongly with me. Post WhatsApp, I've pretty much made it my life's mission to support this foundation and to continue to champion privacy and personal security.
And thinking back to your time at WhatsApp, when you were building that app, is there anything that you could go back and change it before you sold it to Facebook that you would have done differently?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Of course. Going back to your time at WhatsApp, was there anything that you did there when you were building that app that if you were to build it today, you would do differently given how popular it's become and how Facebook has integrated it into the platform?
One thing that I've told people, our execution with WhatsApp was pretty good. It was almost flawless. We might have had a mishap or a misstep here or there along the way, but generally we grew very fast and really provided a great product as a great service. And I sometimes tell people that the fundamental mistake was that we founded WhatsApp as a for-profit company. And so in many ways, this is an opportunity with Signal as a nonprofit to do it the right way. I don't have any regret or anything related to building a company and selling a company. It's just that I think that WhatsApp could have better maintained its independence had it been a nonprofit. Signal is an independent organization and can maintain its independence. And that gives us a much more solid footing for protecting people's privacy.
Seeing another question in the stream right now from Susie, who wants to know, do you think the US should adopt something like GDPR? And I'll add to that, if the US were to adopt something like GDPR, how would it be different here than it is, say, in Europe?
GDPR is a big, long, complicated mess of laws, some of which relate to your right to be forgotten. Some of it relate to where your servers are located. I think that any form of regulation should be done on a very slow and incremental basis versus some broad swath of, let's put 50 laws in front of an organization. Because my experience is that ends up favoring the incumbent big guys who have the resources to adhere to these laws, and it disfavors the smaller startups and innovators who are trying to change the industry. I'm a strong believer in innovation. I'm a strong believer in entrepreneurship. I don't want to necessarily harm those ecosystems by putting a ton of regulation and law in front of them. I'd rather try to be very conscious about the right laws and the right regulations and putting those in front of our users and those protections, but doing it on a sort of small incremental basis.
Another member in the stream is wondering, outside of your business, what privacy choices do you make in your day-to-day life and why? I think they're looking for some advice about how to stay private during challenging times.
For me, especially, it's my privacy is important to me. I do things to protect my home address, for example. So I have a post office box by which I receive and send mail. There are some cases where I have to reveal my home address, but they're fairly limited. I make sure that I use a search engine that's privacy protecting. I use an email system that's privacy protecting. I use a communications messaging product that's also privacy protecting. On top of that, I avoid using non-privacy protecting products. So I avoid some of the big guys out there that are not so good at protecting you.
Stephen here in the stream says, I'm on my work device all the time now and using it to check my personal email and even Amazon. How much should I limit my use, especially since I need to be on my company and VPN'd in a lot?
Yeah, I'm a strong advocate of keeping your personal and your professional activities separate. I know that's painful because it typically means that you carry two devices. But what you don't understand in a lot of cases is that if it's a company phone, the company owns the information on that phone. They also own the right to wipe that phone remotely. And it's a pretty scary place to be in. And so what I generally recommend to people is that they carry two devices, one for personal use and one for private use, for professional use. And that's the best protection. It's also good for the company. They don't want to be in your business. They don't want to have any extra documents related to your personal business. And so, it's the best and strongest way to do that is two devices.
Going to be music to my husband's ears, who's been walking around the house, not just with two phones, but two laptops, driving me crazy, leaving them all over the apartment/office. So I'm sure he's happy that you said that. Brian, as we think about the future of cybersecurity, throughout this pandemic, privacy and technology have really just become synonymous. What do you think are going to be some long-term trends that this pandemic is going to impact when we think about how we think about privacy on the internet?
I think long-term trend is just a continued awareness and request for privacy protecting communication and collaboration tools. Right now, of course, video chat is a fairly hot area because everyone is shifting to video chat. But there's a whole lot of other things around video chat that also promote collaboration online, whether it's document sharing, document editing, sending and receiving files and documents. All of these need to be more strongly protected from a privacy point of view. Different organizations have released tools to help with this. You'll see probably some organization will take a stronger marketing position on privacy and build their brand around privacy. And people will sign up. People want their privacy protected. It will have an effect on business models long-term as well, because surveillance, advertising observation technologies won't be able to exist in the same way. The very, very, very hot article right now about what's happening between iOS 14 and Facebook, because Facebook's claiming that it'll impact their bottom line in a pretty big way.
Well, I don't think there are any silver linings coming out of this crisis, but maybe we can assume that our data will be more secure coming out of this pandemic. Brian, thank you so much for joining us on Business Unusual. I know I speak for the members in the stream to say that we appreciate you sharing your insights.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That was Brian Acton. He is the founder of the Signal Foundation, walking us through how we can be more secure with our data throughout this pandemic. I want to thank him for joining us on today's show. That brings us back to revealing the results of the poll that we had for you in the stream today. How are you feeling about working remotely and your online privacy? A majority of you are more concerned amid this pandemic. We have votes from Gregory, Sean, Lorraine, Mark, Caroline, Nicole, Lisa, Andrea, and Robert all saying they're more concerned. But Io and Kurt in the stream are saying, nope, they're not worried about it. Nancy, Melissa, and Mary say that it depends. We want to thank you all for your votes in the stream today. This is Business Unusual, a live show coming to you from the LinkedIn news page at 12 Eastern daily. Tomorrow, my colleague, Andrew Seaman, will be with you on Get Hired. It's our show focused on job seekers. He's going to be joined with career expert Chris Villanueva. They'll talk strategies to help you land your next job. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Unusual today. I'm Caroline Fairchild. See you again next time.